call this meeting of your Newark City Council to order. Autumn, please call the roll.
Ms. Hall.
Here.
Mr. Labutus.
Present.
Mr. Lang.
Here.
Mr. Marmee. Mr. Rapp.
Here.
Mr. Blake.
Here.
Mr. Bubb.
Here.
Mr. Koss.
Here.
Mr. Fennell.
Here.
And Mr. Frazier.
We have 8 here this evening. Next, we have the invocation by Mr. Labutus, and then the Pledge of Allegiance. Will you please rise?
Shall we pray? Heavenly Father, as we come to prayer this evening, we thank you for this time that we can come together and discuss the vision and the plans for the city. I just ask you to be with our discussions. May they be fruitful and give us your vision for our city. Be with our time. Help us to be good. In Jesus' name, amen.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next on the agenda this evening, we have caucus. That's the time for council to discuss anything pertaining to the agenda tonight. Do we have anything?
Mr. President,
Mr. Lang.
I'd like to, I'll be motioning to reconsider ordinance 18-16 and miscellaneous.
Thank you. The motion to reconsider is a motion that passed 2 weeks ago. If someone on the prevailing side, in other words, that voted yes, would like to motion to reconsider, they make that motion, we get a second. If it gets 6 votes, then we reconsider that, and it's like starting again. Right, Director Sassen?
Correct.
Thank you. Anything else for caucus? Mr. Koss?
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to excuse Mr. Marmee and Mr. Frazier.
Motion to excuse Mr. Marmee and Mr. Frazier. All in favor signify by saying aye. Second by Mr. Rapp. All those opposed? Thank you. That passes. Second by Mr. Rapp. Sorry, I got a little ahead of myself there.
I got you.
Okay, we have the minutes of our June 4th, 2018 meeting. A motion to approve those?
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Labutus.
Second.
Second by Mr. Bubb. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That passes. Thank you. We have 2 reports this evening of standing committees, one from finance and one from service. Without objection, those will be received and filed. We have 2 reports also from city officials this evening, one from our auditor, Stephen Johnson, the operating report for the period ending May 31st, 2018, and Barb Jones, our city income tax administrator, the income tax revenue report for the period ending May 31st, 2018. Without objection, those will be received and filed. Under communications, we have 2 this evening, one from the Ohio Division of Liquor Control, a new application for Towns Family Billiards and Beverages, LLC at 50 North 11th Street, and one from St. Francis de Sales, Father Sizemore and Jim Knox, a letter to the Mayor and City Council asking they consider closing the footbridge on Pearl Street. Without objection, those will be received. Next on the...
God bless you.
Next on the agenda this evening, we have comments from citizens. There are 2 places for comments from citizens. One is now and one is after the legislation. This is not a debate with council. This is just your opportunity to be heard. Do we have anyone for this first section of comments from citizens? Okay. Moving on. Resolutions on the second reading, 18-43.
Resolution 18-43 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Koss, Mr. Frazier, and Mr. Labutus. A resolution authorizing and directing the Director of Public Service to negotiate and enter into contract without competitive bidding for the purchase and installation of new high-efficiency street lighting through the U.S. Commodities Purchasing Program.
You've heard the second reading of 18-43. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rath?
I'd like to make a motion to adopt 18-43.
Motion by Mr. Rath, second by Mr. Kost. Is there any discussion on 18-43? Seeing none, Autumn, please call the roll and vote.
Ms. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. Labutus.
Yes.
Mr. Lang.
Yes.
Mr. Marmee. Mr. Rapp.
Yes.
Mr. Blake.
Yes.
Mr. Bubb.
Yes.
Mr. Koss.
Yes.
Mr. Fennell.
Yes.
And Mr. Frazier.
18-43 passes 8-0. Next on the agenda on the second reading, we have 18-44.
Resolution 18-44 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Koss, Mr. Rapp, and Mr. Labutus. A resolution appropriating monies for the current expenses of the municipal corporation.
You've heard the second reading of 18-44. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Blake.
make a motion to adopt Resolution 1844.
Motion by Mr. Blake,
Second.
second by Mr. Lang. Is there any discussion on 18-44? Seeing none, Autumn, please call the roll to vote.
Ms. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. Labutus.
Yes.
Mr. Lang.
Yes.
Mr. Marmee. Mr. Rapp.
Yes.
Mr. Blake.
Yes.
Mr. Bubb.
Yes.
Mr. Cos?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
And Mr. Frazier.
18-44 passes 8-0. Next on the second reading, we have 18-45.
Resolution 18-45 by Mr. Cost, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Rath, and Mr. Labutus. A resolution appropriating monies for the current expenses of the municipal corporation.
You've heard the second reading of 18-45. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Lang?
I'd like to make a motion to adopt Resolution 18-45.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Lang, second by Mr. Cost. Is there any discussion on 18-45? Seeing none, Autumn, please call the roll to vote.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee? Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cos?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
And Mr. Frazier.
18-45 passes 8-0. Now we go on to resolutions on the first reading, 18-48.
Resolution 18-48 by Mr. Cost, Mr. Labutus, and Mr. Rath. A resolution appropriating monies for the current expenses of the municipal corporation.
Mr. President,
Mr. Blake?
move to waive the 2-day reading rule.
This is under the first reading. Moved away the 2-day reading rule by Mr. Blake.
Second.
Second by Mr. Rath. Mr. Blake?
There's some payouts for employees in this resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Autumn, please call the roll to waive the 2-day reading rule.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee? Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cos?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
And Mr. Frazier.
2-day reading rule is waived. Mr. Blake?
Move to adopt Resolution 1848.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Blake.
Second.
Second by Mr. Rath. Is there any discussion on 18-48? Seeing none, Autumn, please call the roll to vote.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee? Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes.
Mr. Cos?
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
And Mr. Frazier.
18-48 passes 8-0. Next on the first reading, we go to 18-49.
Resolution 18-49 by Mr. Cost, Mr. Labutus, and Mr. Rath. A resolution appropriating monies for the current expenses of the municipal corporation.
18-49 will be held for 2 weeks for a second reading. Next, we go to 18-50.
Resolution 18-50 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Cost, Mr. Labutus. A resolution authorizing and directing the Director of Public Service for the City of Newark, Ohio to enter into a lease agreement with Park National Bank for the lease purchase of 4 snowplow trucks for use in the Division of Streets.
18-50 will be held for 2 weeks for a second reading. And finally, tonight, we have 18-51.
Resolution 18-51 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Cost, Mr. Labutus. A resolution authorizing and directing the Director of Public Service for the City of Newark, Ohio to enter into a lease purchase agreement with Park National Bank for the lease purchase of new high-efficiency street lighting through the U.S. Communities Purchasing Program.
And 18-51 will be held for 2 weeks to our next meeting. Thank you for your attention this evening. That concludes our legislation. Next on the agenda, we have our second opportunity for comments from citizens. Do we have anyone? If we do, just raise your hand. Yes.
No one else? I'm first. The last name's Blaney, and I live at 1407 Misty Glen in Newark. First name, I go by Kim, and I just have a few comments. First, I think it's appropriate at times to compliment this city for some of the civil rights and human rights they've done recently. I think Jeremy, and maybe there's some future things we can work on. But Newark has made a lot of press and national for some of the things you've done that major cities have done so good. Keep up the work. Second, it's appropriate that this city should be complimented for, it's always good to compliment before you have a complaint, but some of this, the downtown and that farmer's market, we've really got a nice, and a lot of towns probably would love to have some of what we have. For years, I was involved with a lot of community service clubs and not-for-profits, and I think I'd been on the Parks Board for a long time, but I think there was a former mayor that attempted to slander me, so I don't do anything anymore. It's not worth it. Okay, I I think it's important to bring up one thing, even though most important, those individuals and those families that have been affected by the opioid crisis, we should have a deep understanding and empathy or whatever the appropriate words. But some of us who I don't even drink, maybe on occasion, I don't understand the whole drug thing, but I was counting up the number of people, 7 or 8 people that I've had to evict or who've turned to opioids. So I'm struggling as someone who's lived in this town for 61 years and had rental property for close to 40 years. I find it very difficult to do business in this town, and I think that even though we have these beautiful facilities at this square and all these other improvements, what it's doing to our properties and the amount of properties we've had to tear down just because of... So that might be one of the biggest challenges of this city or small cities, is how we deal with that, those individuals. So I had a reputation before of never coming down here and complaining, but always having a suggestion. I have no suggestion. So let me move on. I've never really complained about an individual, but what brought me down here, and I've considered coming down here for many months or if not a year, but I've always talked myself out of it. But I called the zoning department, or I actually called the engineering, and I was treated rudely today. And if anybody from that department, and I was really shocked. All I did was have a couple questions, and I've had trouble with a property owner that I surround over there off of Rice, and I was just asking some questions, and they accused me of being... And I've never even set foot in an office in years until recently, when that individual's been causing not only problems with me, but with 3 to 4 of my tenants. So if anybody wants to find out, I found that to be very unacceptable. I do retail. I've done other work in customer service. Okay. So let me get to the real meat of what I want to say today very quickly, and I will respect the time. This individual that I surround, because I didn't close the alley, now they have intimidated me, and they've done everything to threaten me and other people, and I've had the police out there several times. But so I will be more specific about what my questions and what I'm after tonight. That land between, and that's the question I had asked for zoning, that land between, maybe the law director can help me, that land between the city street or the city curb and what would be a sidewalk, that land that we call right-of-way, that the city actually owns, that most of us cut that area, that's not ours. So I asked if I didn't cut it, and they said, well, I'd probably be fined for not cutting that area, even though I don't own that. So I will be exactly to the point. This one individual has now been taking their four-wheel drive and turfing it on my property to intimidate me and my tenants, and nothing's been done about it. And even though my son's a police sergeant in another state, and I should have went through the whole process with the police department, but somehow something needs to be done to find out what to do about somebody who, either the city owns that and they take care of it, or if I take care of it, then I should have rights to that grass area and somebody else shouldn't have a right, because the police so far have said we don't have any jurisdiction to do anything about that area. So in other words, if you have that grass area in your yard between the street and your property, and somebody's constantly tearing up to intimidate you, you're required to take care of it, but you can't do anything about it to stop them. So if anybody wants to get a hold of me, I don't know if you put this in the minutes, but my cell phone, maybe you can just privately take a note, is 740-258-2760. I'm very at the end of considering leaving this town of my home for 60 years because of the difficulties in being a landlord and the difficulties of being intimidated by other people. So I'm done, and thank you for listening to me, and somebody can get a hold of me if you feel that there's an issue that could be solved. But I have no answers for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
My name is Tim Theodoro. I'm at 235 English Avenue.
I'm sorry, could you say your name again?
Tim Theodoro. I'm at 235 English Avenue here in Newark. And just a Couple concerns I have mainly is some reservations I have about the construction of a new Newark Fire Station 5. Normally, I'm not opposed to anything our safety services wants to do at all, but with the new Station 5, I'm just kind of concerned about adequately staffing it, equipping it, and more importantly, cross-manning from Station 2, which is where, a stone's throw away from where I live. And I was wondering if maybe they could just, I know they want to get to down to the King Road area there, but would it be possible to just connect Baker and Evans and maybe just take Baker all the way to King and see what the response time is, after that, before they start putting a Station 5 in that area. And the other issue I have, kind of a small one, but the billboard issue at Thornwood Crossing, the area looks really good. I love what they've done with the bridge over there. And I've noticed that Barnes has a billboard. I know it's in Granville Township, right there off of City Gate, but I was wondering why Kessler needs another one just a stone's throw away from those billboards there. That's basically all I got. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any city officials this evening? Okay. Ms. Hall.
I'll pass, thank you very much.
Mr. Labutus.
I just need to call a safety committee meeting for next time, and with that I will pass.
Thank you, Mr. Labutus. Mr. Lang.
So I'd like to make a motion to reconsider Resolution 18-16.
Motion by Mr. Lang to reconsider 18-16. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Rath. Mr. Lang.
Yeah, so the purpose of reconsidering now is to allow sufficient time for residents who receive letters to allow them time to object if they so desire. The ordinance just simply passed too quick and too soon, and we were still within that objection period, and so we need to reconsider it to move it outside of that period.
Any other discussion?
Mr. President,
Mr. Bub?
I will abstain from any vote on this matter as I serve on the Fairway Estates Homeowners Association.
Thank you, Mr. Bub.
Mr. President, could I weigh in also?
Yes.
I know it's unusual for me to participate in the debate, but this is a legal issue that the city is faced with. We have residents up there who have a right to express their objection, one of whom did just today, that we've received. We need to give them ample opportunity to appear before council and express their opinion. We have not really done that, so the purpose here is simply to allow them that meaningful opportunity. So I'd really appreciate the support for Mr. Lang's motion, because it really is something that legally we need to do.
So if we get 6 votes, then it will be reconsidered, and then it'll be like just starting again.
Should have 7, but
Yeah. It takes 7?
yeah.
Okay.
The original ordinance was phrased as an emergency.
Okay.
Motion to reconsider takes the same number of votes as a
Right.
motion to adopt, so we need 7 votes.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Autumn, please call a roll to vote.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee? Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Abstain.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
And Mr. Frazier.
So that's 7 votes. So the motion is reconsidered. Mr. Lang.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to table this to a date certain to Monday, July 2nd, to allow, again, as Mr. Sasson mentioned, time for residents to object, and also to allow Mr. Frazier to be here, and of course Mr. Marmee, who represents the 6th Ward where this property is located.
Second.
Second by Mr. Rath. Is there any other discussion on the motion to table? Autumn, please call the roll.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Labutus?
Yes.
Mr. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee? Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Abstain.
Mr. Koss,
Yes.
Mr. Fennell?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier.
18-16 then has been tabled until July 2nd. Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Mr. Ryan.
So, Mr. Theodore, thank you for coming. Appreciate your comments regarding the fire station and the billboard. I actually did want to talk about Ordinance 1752, which was the ordinance we passed allowing that billboard to be moved. With all due respect to the advocate, I think one of the things that was left out of that piece was the fact that we passed a nearly identical measure back in February. Very similar facts. The proposed location wasn't on the map. Planning Commission rationale for rejecting it was largely they didn't want to reopen the map. And it was clear in looking at the map that had that location been part of the map when we drew it, it would have been a billboard location, would have been allowed there. When we voted on that 1753 back in February, I'll say this, there were 7 of us that voted the same way on both issues. There were 3 of us that changed their mind. And there was one of us that made a significant issue out of the fact that there were some political donations made by somebody who would benefit from that legislation. I don't know if I agree with the wisdom of trying to win political points by taking a shot at colleagues, but quite frankly, I think there was only one of us who was really talking about the individual involved in their party affiliation when they talked about their choice on this matter. And so I don't think we should ever play party politics when it comes to how a property owner can use their property. And that left out of all this as well was the fact that there's a church over there, and that church really benefited from the financial revenue that they're going to get from as a result of this measure that we passed. And so it's not always as cut and dry as, okay, who's benefiting. I think we need to be consistent in enforcing and in making our decisions. And it wasn't enough to me that this wasn't on the map when the map was drawn. And so, and I guess that kind of gets to another issue. And I think more importantly, and as I've said before, I think we should all assume the best of everyone up here. I think everyone up here is really trying to do what their best job to protect the people that they're sworn to represent. And so, I think we can disagree philosophically, but I don't think it ever needs to get personal. I did think, turning to the fire station, I did think Chief Connor did a great job on Thursday. We had a town hall there, took a lot of questions, discussed the fire and EMS in great detail. I thought he gave a great presentation. And one of the things I hope folks see, I tried to post it on my Facebook page, but he did a great map that shows the response times all over the city. And if you look where we want to put this Station 5, you have a zone that is nearly 7 minutes and a zone that's nearly 8 minutes that we want to put this fire station right on top of. And so when I see response times of 7, 8 minutes, and then I'm told by our chief that we need to be able to get there in 4 to try to save someone's life, it's clear that we're just, wherever you want to put the people we've got, they're not in the right place to service the whole city. And so at this point, we've got donated land, we've got $380,000 from a prior station build, and an administration who's willing to look at increasing staff levels, working on equipment needs to satisfy an urgent need. So I think it's important that we move forward with the plans. I think if we can give the administration and Chief Connor time to be able to take measures now to plan for this, I think we'll be able to do it. They've already talked about applying for safer grants so that we can improve our numbers from 79 to 81 next year. But that'll also allow them to start planning their budget moving forward to adjust for the equipment needs as well. And so, moving forward with this, I think it puts the right kind of pressure on everybody to get this fixed now and improve the safety services that we provide. I don't know if that'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Tim, I don't know if it was very clear or not, and I don't know if you said it, but if they put up that billboard there at the church property, the other billboard will come down.
Thanks, sir. Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Rath.
Yeah, actually the one that's going to come down is the one at Reddington and Cherry Valley Road, not necessarily the Barnes billboard, but the one at Reddington and Cherry Valley is in more of a residential neighborhood than it is a business neighborhood. And it's more of an eyesore for that neighborhood than I would like to see, so I'm very excited about taking one down and put another one up by the highway. I think that's going to serve that neighborhood much better. We are making progress, I guess, in investigating the 911 incident that I talked about 2 weeks ago. I I know Mr. Labutus, as the safety chair, had a meeting with our police chief as well as our safety director. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. I have an appointment scheduled to meet with the Licking County Sheriff's Department, and I'm looking forward to that conversation and finding out where our breakdown is, if it's an ongoing thing or if it's a single incident, but finding a resolution to be sure that situation doesn't happen again for our citizens of Newark. With that, I'll call a service committee meeting, and I will pass.
Thank you, Mr. Rapp. Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Mr. President. We need to call a finance committee meeting for July 2nd. And I just want to make a comment about 1845, which we passed in support of the improvements happening at Wells Park. Putting on my Kiwanis hat, today at Kiwanis, Jeff Hotchkiss came, Mr. Mayor, with the Parks Department, and he received a donation of $6,800 from Kiwanis for improvements at Wells Park. And so it's nice to see our Parks Department working with service organizations such as Kiwanis to really make some needed improvements at Wells Park. That park is very heavily used, and the draining of the softball field is going to be corrected, increased parking, handicap accessibility with the bathrooms and the shelter house. So it's really going to be a very nice improvements there. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, for focusing on the parks and for Wells Park specifically. And it was nice to see Jeff at lunch today at the Kiwanis luncheon to receive that donation. And I understand that they're going to have some type of signage that says that the Kiwanis will be participated in that project. So thank you for working with Kiwanis on that. I do want to thank the gentleman for coming forward regarding the fire station. I think the meeting, the town hall that we had last week, working with President Ellington and Councilman Fennell, and our fire chief did an excellent job. I mean, he did almost 2 hours of questions and answers with the people that were in attendance, and we just have a real top-notch administrator heading our division of fire and EMS, and I just think the world of Mr. Connor, and glad that he was able to provide that. I hope that's just the beginning of discussions to come, because there are a lot of, you're here tonight, and there are other people in our community that have real concerns about where the direction is for safety in our community. You mentioned the cross-staffing. You're going to sort of share staffing amongst two, from the fire station that's closest to your home to the proposed location, and that's very concerning. There is no real connection road to quickly get from the proposed location to North 21st Street. The Baker Boulevard Road is not going to be done. There's no funding for that currently, and so that's a question of concern. So are we shifting the concerns of having long response times in one area of our community to increasing response times now to another area of our community? So there's quite a few questions that need to be answered, in addition to the equipment that we're going to be placing in that area, the mileage that's on that equipment, and then quite frankly the human mileage that's on our staff. We have a lot of staff members within the Division of Fire and EMS that already are highly stressed, and if we're going to stress them anymore by adding an additional facility. So I look forward to having continued discussions with council members and the administration to see what is the proposal, what is the plan moving forward. So I would thank you for coming tonight. The second point you brought up was the billboard, and I'll clearly say that the Planning Commission was opposed to that. We did receive communications from the Granville officials who were opposed to that. And most importantly to me was that the owner of the Cherry Valley Lodge, who has invested millions of dollars into that facility, was opposed to this. If we're talking about job creation, maintaining jobs, maintaining a facility on one of the major entrances to our community, I take his concerns in very deeply. And anyone who makes an investment into a piece of property with that kind of money, I think that needs to be considered. And that was something that I think was just clearly ignored. And that's why I said what I said, and that's why I did what I did, because I was referred to in the gentleman's earlier comments. So I'll just stand by what I said, and everything's public record, so I don't need to say any more. With that, I'll pass, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Mr. Bubb.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just wanted to remind everybody about the Downtown Summerfest, June 21st to the 23rd at the historic jail parking lot. 3 days of events, vendors, live entertainment. I will be down there Friday, and if volunteering, and you will be on a one-drink limit.
Okay, great. Does that mean you're going to buy me a drink?
So,
Is that no?
I'm locked against bartender, so I'm going to put you on a one.
Okay, Mr. Cobb. I'll pass, Mr. President. That was enough of that. Mr. Connect. I'll pass. Okay. Well, I appreciate everybody coming tonight. Thank you for your attendance. Our next meeting is July 2nd, which is 2 weeks from tonight. The committee starts at 5:45 here in this room, and our full council meeting is at 7. If we don't have very many committees, I'll try to bring pizza next time, next in 2 weeks. So that'll be my plan. So, is there a motion to adjourn? Motion by Mr. Scott, second by Mr. Labutus. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Same sign. Thank you.